Ask people what they know of the Psalms. People will know Psalm 19. People will know Psalm 91. People will know Psalm 1. They will know Psalm 23. People know many of the Psalms, but Psalm 26 is not one that is that well known, but a lovely psalm. A psalm of David. Now, just before we read it, just turn back to Psalm 25, which we looked at last week, and have a look there. It also says a psalm of David. So both of these psalms, which follow one on another, and remember this, God has placed the psalms not just randomly in the book of Psalms. He didn't just kind of throw them all up in the air and see what order they came down in. God has put his psalms together in the order that we have them for a purpose. And so these two simple psalms, which are simply headed Psalm of David, it seems they go well together, and we'll see something of that in a moment. David, the Psalm of David. Vindicate me, Lord, because I have lived with integrity and have trusted in the Lord without wavering. Test me, Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and mind. For your faithful love guides me, and I live by your truth. I do not sit with the worthless or associate with hypocrites. I hate a crowd of evildoers. I do not sit with the wicked. I wash my hands in innocence and go around your altar, Lord, raising my voice in thanksgiving and telling about your wondrous works. Lord, I love the house where you dwell, the place where your glory resides. Do not destroy me along with sinners, or my life along with men of bloodshed, in whose hands are evil schemes and whose right hands are filled with bribes. But I live with integrity. Redeem me and be gracious to me. My foot stands on level ground. I will bless the Lord in the assemblies. May the Lord bless us as we consider this psalm together this evening. Oh, what a summer we've had. If you've been watching the news, so often over this summer, we've had these reports of these out-of-control wildfires. We had them in Rhodes, we've seen them in Greece, we've seen them in Hawaii, in France, in Spain, in Portugal. Virtually all across this northern hemisphere, there's been these raging fires that have been burning all across the globe, and it's nothing new. You can go to places where they are really prone to fires, like in Australia. We had the opportunity in 1993, December 1993 through until January 1994, to spend some time in Sydney, and when we left, basically the whole western area of Sydney up into the Blue Mountains was ablaze. In fact, we have photographs that my mum took of the plane that we were about to fly off in, and took a photograph of the plane, and all you can see behind this plane are clouds of smoke. It was just absolutely smoke wherever you went because of these fires that had been raging. And it just has been making me think of James and chapter 3 and verses 5 and 6, where James says, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is a world of unrighteousness, and it's placed among our members. It stains the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. One of the things that if you ever go to Sydney or go up into the Blue Mountains, you'll quickly see why it's so prone to these fires. As you walk through those Blue Mountains, obviously in New South Wales, if you have a picture of New South Wales in your mind, you certainly will be thinking of eucalyptus trees. Everywhere you go, there are eucalyptus trees. But as you go around those Blue Mountains, there's another tree in those forests there, growing wild, turpentine trees. And you go and scratch those trees and you can smell the terps. And so when you have those very, very hot days in Sydney, it can get up to, in those western areas outside of Sydney, it can get up to close to 50 degrees. In fact, when it gets to 45 degrees, they say to everybody, you better stop working. And they give people a break because you can't work in that heat. But it can get up to 50 degrees. And you've got these highly flammable trees there. All it takes is for a broken piece of glass somewhere to reflect the sun like a little magnifying glass, and boom, you've got it. And the speed with which those fires travel is absolutely frightening, particularly going uphill, up the mountains. A fire crawls down a mountain, but they rage up a mountain because that's the way the flames go. And so they just take off. And there are places where the flames, the fires, are spreading faster than what the train travels, the suburban trains, stopping at all the stops and so on. Just an idea of how wildly it spreads and how difficult it is to try and contain them. When I was a child, we used to live in a house, and right out of our back door we were onto what we called the koppies. It's an Afrikaans word which means the heads, basically rocks, outcrops of rocks. It was just open field. You couldn't farm it because of all the rocks and the little hills and these things, but a lot of grass there. And in the winter months, you would, when it's very dry in Johannesburg, you'd often get the veld fires, and we'd go out and try and stop them, and you'd be beating out the fire here, and then it was there, and then you'd be beating it there, and because of the wind, it was all around you, and very, very difficult to now control once the fire starts. And James says the tongue is like that. It starts these fires. There was a lady who went to her pastor and she said, "Pastor, I've been convicted of the gossiping that I've been doing. And I don't know what to do. I'm so struck with guilt. What can I do to rid myself of this guilt?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you what you do is you take a pillow slip, empty pillow slip, and you fill it with feathers. And now what I want you to do is you go around and you take those feathers and you go and put a feather at the door of everyone's home that you have gossiped about. Just go around and do that." And so off she went, and she diligently did this and came back to the pastor a couple of days later and said to him, "Pastor, I've done all that, but I don't feel any better." And he said, "Well, that's because you're only half finished. What you need to do now is you now need to go back with an empty pillowcase, and you need to go and pick up those feathers and put them back into the pillowcase." And so off she went. Came back the day later, and she was even more miserable than before, because she said, "Pastor, I wasn't able to find a single feather. They'd all blown away. I couldn't get any of them." And he said to her, "That's exactly what gossip is like. Once it's out of your mouth and it's gone, you have no control of it anymore. You can't bring it back. It's an impossible thing to bring back." Well, David in this situation is facing a situation where he's under attack. He's under a verbal attack. There were those who were going about spreading fake news and false reports about David, perhaps saying things, telling things that David was doing that he wasn't doing. And another way that people gossip is not telling the good things that you are doing. And so David had this situation. We know that that was what he was facing because he prays and asks God to vindicate him. You see, he's got to the place where he's now tired of trying to put out all these fires. He knows that people are saying these things about him, and he's trying to curb everywhere he can. He's like the boy with his finger in the dike. You know, now there's holes spreading everywhere. You don't have enough fingers. How can you stop this? And so he turns to the Lord to vindicate him. He was tired of trying to vindicate himself. And so he turns and says, "Vindicate me." He turns to the Lord, and basically he waits on the Lord. And why I said Psalm 25 and 26 go together, I believe that that Psalm 26 is really a outliving. It's a practical application of what he has prayed in Psalm 25 and verse 21, where he says, "May integrity and what is right watch over me, for I wait for you." Then you see it starts in Psalm 26, "Vindicate me, Lord, because I have lived with integrity." And that psalm ends, Psalm 26 ends basically in verse 11 saying, "But I live with integrity, redeem me and be gracious to me." So David's integrity is at stake here. People have been saying things about him that are false, and he's been getting a bad reputation because of things that are false that have been said about him. And he's got tired of trying to do anything about it. And so what he now does is he now waits on the Lord. Verse 21 of Psalm 25, "May integrity and what is right watch over me, for I wait for you." That's a lovely word, that waiting on the Lord. And the best way I can explain it, I think, is like for us yesterday going to London. So we get into the car and off we drive down to Brentwood and go to catch the train at Brentwood. Now we're driving along and I'm driving, and I'm just one of those drivers, that I'm always, am I, doing well enough on this road, and I need to be making sure that I'm keeping good time and so on and so forth. And so I'm very much on my nerves the whole time I'm driving, just making sure that I'm keeping up at good pace and getting where I should be going in good time and so on. And so I'm in control of this thing, and I'm trying to do it the whole time to make sure we get to the station on time. I don't want to be late, and I'm pushing it, and I'm doing it, and I'm doing it. We get to the station, park the car, and we go onto the platform. And what do? We wait. We wait for the train. I can do nothing else but wait for the train. It's completely, I'm in the hands of the rail system. I now wait upon it, and I trust it, and I rely on it. And then you get onto the train, and I'm not sitting there going, "I hope we're going to be on time. I hope we're going to..." What can I do about it? I just wait, and I rely on the train to get me to where we're going on time. And you know what? It did. Even although apparently there were strikes, we didn't see anything like that yesterday. But the point is that's what David is doing. "Lord, I'm giving up here. I'm giving up, and I'm just going to wait on you. I'm going to leave it up to you." All of these tongue wagging that is going on, all of this gossip, all of this backbiting, "Lord, I'm tired of trying to curb it myself. I'm going to wait on you." And he's dealing here with a subject which is not foreign to any of us, is it? The situation of gossip, people speaking about one another behind their backs and saying things, is not an uncommon thing. It is common wherever you go. You will find it there. You've had people gossip about you. You've had people saying things behind your back that they wouldn't say to your face. You've had that. You know it. You've got accounts of people saying something about you, and that's not true. And you go, and sadly, let every one of us acknowledge there have been times when we've been guilty of speaking behind somebody else's back when we shouldn't have, and we've been speaking out of turn. You see, gossip is one of those things, it has two sides to the coin. There are the subjects who do the gossiping, and there are the objects who are gossiped about. And you and I will find ourselves in one of those two camps at various times. Let me say to you, let us rather be in the camp that David was at this point in time, of being the object of the gossip. Rather be the one gossiped about than the one doing the gossiping. I remember Matthew Henry telling the story of him being attacked. He faced a violent attack one day, and they stole everything from him, and when he got home, he prayed. And he prayed to the Lord, and he said, "Lord, I was attacked, and it was dreadful, but I thank you for three things. I thank you, Lord, that although they attacked me and robbed me, they did not harm my person. I thank you, secondly, that although they took everything I had, it wasn't much. And thirdly, I thank you, Lord, that it was I who was attacked and not I who was doing the attacking. And I think it's that we need to think about when it comes to this whole matter of gossip. And here David, facing these attacks, what does he do? He goes to the Lord. How does he go to the Lord? He goes to the Lord in prayer. And what does he pray? Well, he prays three things. And so I've entitled the sermon this evening, When the Forest Fires Rage. The forest fires rage. What does David do? What should we do? Go to the Lord in prayer. How? I'll pray for three things. First of all, pray for vindication. That's what David is praying, verse 1. Vindicate me, Lord, because I have lived with integrity and have trusted in the Lord. Vindicate me, that's the way it's translated in the CSB, it's translated that way in the ESV, it's translated that way in various other translations. I know that in the New Living Translation, the King James and various other translations, it's literally, and more literally, judge me. He's asking for the Lord to look upon him, and we'll touch on that in a moment, but he's saying, Lord, you be my judge, not these other people. I don't want them to be my judge. I want you to be the one to judge me and see whether I am living with integrity. Basically, he's praying the same thing that Paul says to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 3. Paul says, it is of little importance to me that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself, for I am not conscious of anything against myself. But I am not justified by this. It is the Lord who judges me. Paul says, I don't care if you judge me, because as I look at myself, I believe I'm justified. But even that isn't what justifies me. I look to the Lord. He's the one who is to justify me and judge me. So David, like Paul, puts his reputation in God's hands and he leaves it there. He waits on the Lord. He places all of his weight in the hands of the Lord. Now, David was prepared to do that, and we've got to ask ourselves, am I prepared to do that? And stop and think for a moment. When you hear things are being said about you, are you prepared to just trust in the Lord and put all of your reputation in his hands? Well, David is prepared to do that, and he can do that only because his integrity is intact. Not moral and sinless perfection, but his integrity is intact. And so you and I can pray for vindication if it is a prayer that is coming out of a position of integrity. David's basically saying to the Lord, my integrity is intact. Look at what he says, vindicate me, Lord, because I have lived with integrity and have trusted in the Lord. Now, integrity is a very hard word to understand, really. In fact, the Hebrew word that is translated integrity here is a very difficult word to translate and to understand. Some preachers and some commentators have said, well, it's the opposite to disintegrity. We know what it is for things to disintegrate. Integrity is the opposite of that. But actually, it's more than that. It was the word that they used when they were making a piece of pottery. They would take the clay, they would choose as pure clay as they possibly could and go through the clay to make sure that it had no impurities in it. And they would look at it and say, okay, we think this clay is spot on. There's nothing impure in this clay. Now let's start making the vase or the whatever we are making. And so they would shape it and fashion it and so on. And once it had been completed and was then able to dry, they could then take it and hold it up and look at it against a sharp, bright light like the sun. And they'd look at it and they'd turn it around and look through the thing all the way. And wherever there were impurities, they would then show up in the vase or the pitcher, whatever it was that they were making. And so a vase or a pitcher or a bowl or whatever was considered to have integrity if they found that the clay was the same clay all the way around. It had no imperfections, it had no nothing in it that was not genuine clay material that they had chosen. And David says to God, my integrity is intact. I'm complete. What you see is what you get. It is the genuine article. And he tells the Lord in verses 3 through to verse 8, basically, what are the things in which he is prepared to hold his integrity up to the Lord. He's telling the Lord what is in place. And we need to ask ourselves, are these things in place in your life and in mine? First of all, obviously, his trust in God. Verse 1, I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. That's what I'm doing right now, and I have done that, and I will continue to do that to the best of my ability. In all situations, without wavering, past, present, and future, Lord, I'm trusting in you. Secondly, he says, Lord, my walk with you is a walk that is in your love. Verse 3, for your faithful love guides me, and I live by your truth. He continues to live out that truth in his life. Verse 3. He says in verses 4 and 5, he is a man who avoids bad company. I do not sit with the worthless or associate with hypocrites. There's two different groups of people there who are unworthy, two different groups of people who are bad company there. On the one hand, there are those who are worthless. We could say these are the drunks and the carousers, these are the adulterers, these are those whose language is foul and all that sort of thing. The kind of people that we say, oh, don't mix with those sort of people. They really are unsavory type of characters. We don't associate with them. Actually, we should be. Our Lord Jesus Christ did to preach the gospel to them. But no, we are not to make them our bosom buddies that are going to influence our lives. Steer away from that kind of person. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33, which says that bad company spoils good character or spoils good morals. So be careful. There's that story about, you can tell a person by the company he keeps. And my father used to recite this poem to us that went along those lines, and about this chap who was walking down the road, and he saw this chap lying in the gutter next to a pig. And he said, you can tell a person by the company they keep. And with that, the pig got up and walked away. David's saying, I don't associate with that sort of thing. I don't have anything to do that. But, on the other hand, he says, or associate with hypocrites. I'm not going to sit there with those who are holier than thou. Those who are sitting in the churches puffing themselves up saying how holy they are. And they actually are not really that holy. They know that within there, what's going on in their minds. They know what's going on in their hearts. And all they are is hypocrites. David says, I don't associate with them either. Two groups of people that we should be wary of. Because that can spoil, both of those can spoil good character. David says, I haven't indulged in their deceitful, ungodly hypocrisy. I haven't involved myself with their evil, wicked works, and so on. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of the sinner, nor sits in the seat of the scoffer. David avoided all of them. He says in verses 6 and 7 that his worship has been with integrity. I wash my hands in innocence and go around your altar, Lord, raising my voice in thanksgiving and telling about your wondrous works. When I come to worship you, Lord, I come and I'm washing my hands in innocence. I believe that I've confessed all my sins before you. So I'm not coming in as a hypocrite to worship you. When I go around the altar, Lord, raising my voice in thanksgiving and telling about your wondrous works, it's coming out of a pure heart. It's coming out of a heart that really is saying, Lord, yes, I truly want your name to be glorified. This is not about me standing on the street corners making long prayers so that everybody can see me and say, whoa, how holy this person is. No, David says, I do it with all integrity. In verse 8, he says, my love for you, Lord, my affections have been sincere. They've been correctly prioritized. David loved the Lord, and he loved the Lord's house, he loved the Lord's people, he loved the Lord's worship, and so on. And so he says, Lord, I love the house where you dwell, the place where your glory resides. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord. David loved the Lord, and as imperfect as what his love is, and we'll see later that David is not claiming some kind of sinless perfection in any of these things at all. But David is saying, Lord, and we'll see that now, you know my heart. Lord, you know my mind. You know my motives. You know where I stand. As much as what I slip and fall here and there, nevertheless, Lord, this is my desire. These are my priorities. And I can say, Lord, I'm coming to you open as far as that is concerned. That's his prayer. He can say, vindicate me, Lord, because I have lived with integrity. He's saying, Lord, you know that I've lived with integrity. Here are these things that I will show you and remind you of, that I have been living a life that is a life of integrity. And so he's humbly opening himself out to God's examination. That's what he's doing, which then is the second thing that David prays. And so in verse 2, he prays for examination. Verses 3 through to 8, as we've already looked at, he gives God the basis on which he says, Lord, you can examine me in these areas and see that my integrity is intact. But look at verse 2. He says, test me, Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and mind, for your faithful love guides me, and I live by your truth. David is saying to the Lord, Lord, here I am. Try me. Here I am, Lord. Bring me before your court. Here I am, Lord. Test me and see if there is anything impure within me. Notice what David prays. He says, Lord, examine my heart. He says, Lord, examine my mind. And then, Lord, examine my life. For your faithful love guides me, and I live by your truth. Examine my heart. Examine where I stand. Examine my emotions. Examine where I anchor my life. Examine what is foundational, what is core to my being. Examine my affections. Then he says, examine my mind. Now, does anybody's translation say anything else except mind there? Examine my heart and... Anybody got anything else there?
What verse?
Sorry, verse 2. Verse 2.
Put me on trial, Lord, and cross-examine me. Test my motives and my heart.
Test my motives and my heart. Okay, that's an interesting one. Basically, the word there, mind, is it's not so much a translation of that word. It's that word was used figuratively by these people. Literally, he's saying, examine my kidneys. That's what he's literally saying, examine my kidneys. but it was a word that was used figuratively of the mind. Why? I don't know, but that is the way it was. But he's saying, refine and look at my heart and look at my mind, the way I think, the way, and I suppose that it's one of the reasons why it's used figuratively of the mind is it's consider how I process things. Just as our kidneys process things, how do I process things in my mind? And what he does is he's saying to the Lord, Lord, there are three ways in which you can test me. Just as the metallurgist examines the metal before him in three ways. A metallurgist will take a metal and they will look at it and they say, it looks like the genuine article. It looks like silver. Then they will examine it in terms of feel. It feels like silver. When I beat it with a hammer, when I do various things to it, it reacts like silver. So it feels like silver. And it weighs like silver. So we test it by its looks, you test it by its physical properties, and you test it by its weight. If it looks like silver, if it reacts like silver, and if it weighs like silver, it's silver. So that's the way David is coming to the Lord, saying, Lord, look at my heart, look at my mind, look at my life. Does my life reflect what's coming out of my mouth saying that the Lord is in my heart? Does my life reflect what I'm saying with my lips when I say, I meditate on your law day and night? Does my life look like it? Is that genuine? Or are there any impurities there? Put my life, put my words, put my actions under your microscope. Put my heart, put my mind under your microscope and test me. Apply the pressures, apply the tests, and make sure, Lord, that my life is a life that is genuinely. Really, in many respects, David is saying here, not just a matter of examine and test me, he's literally saying, refine me in these things. Basically, what does a refiner do? A refiner takes the metal and takes the ore, puts it into the pot and into the furnace, and they pump up the heat. They pump up the bellows and the metal boils, and what happens is all of the dross rises to the top, and then they scrape the dross away. So all of the impurities get scraped away, and the more and more the refiner works there, he is testing it for impurities, and when the impurities show, he removes them until eventually you are left with pure gold, you're left with pure silver, whatever it may be. And that's what David is praying and asking the Lord to do there. Test me, not just a matter of testing me, see if I'm genuine or not, but where you see that I'm not genuine, Lord, deal with it, pull it out, extract it, and get rid of it. And so, beloved, he comes and he prays this way to the Lord, and I say to you, that takes a brave man to do that. Actually, let me cancel that statement. What that takes is it takes a faithful man. You see, a brave man really has confidence in his own ability and own thoughts. David is saying, no, not in me, but in you. And test that, Lord. Make sure that is where my faith is. Make sure that is where my reputation lies. But David must be a confident man to pray like this. Confident not in himself, but confident in the Lord. And so we also need to come. We need to pray to the Lord, examine me. But don't just examine, Lord. Examine and refine me as you find those salvations. Because David knew that he was not sinlessly perfect. And that's why he prays in the third place. If you have a look at verses 9 to 11, he prays for salvation. So he prays for vindication, he prays for examination, and he prays for salvation. Do not destroy me along with sinners, or my life along with men of bloodshed, in whose hands are evil schemes and whose right hands are filled with bribes. But I live with integrity. Redeem me and be gracious to me. He knows that he needs the Lord's grace upon his life. Be gracious to me. My foot stands on level ground. I will bless the Lord in the assemblies. David is praying that that's where he will stand. David can say, I'm a man of integrity. Why? Because he's standing on the level ground. He's standing on the firm pedestal of what God has done, God's grace and God's mercy towards him. You see, basically in all of this, what David is saying, although, Lord, I am sure that you will find me innocent, you will find that my mind and my heart and my actions, that there is integrity. Although I believe that, and I'm prepared to put myself in your court, as Paul put himself in the Lord's court, he nevertheless is saying to the Lord, but Lord, I know that I am a sinner. So notice what he prays. He prays three things. First of all, in verses 9 and 10, he prays, spare me or save me. Do not destroy me along with sinners, or my life along with men of bloodshed. Don't allow that to happen. Spare me and save me from my sins and from the ways of the wicked. And yes, I try to lead a life of integrity, but I need you for that. Secondly, he prays, redeem me. So spare me, but secondly, redeem me. Verse 11, but I live with integrity. Redeem me and be gracious to me. Because you see, I know that I do fall short. Often. And therefore there is a price to be paid for my sin. I pray, Lord, that you will pay that price, that you will redeem me in this situation. And then he prays as well, not only redeem me, but be gracious to me. Because it's only because of grace that God would redeem him. It's not, he could not plead for God's redemption based on his own merits. This is not some kind of merit-based salvation that David is pleading here. And then again in verse 11, he's praying for the Lord to be merciful to him. Some translations say, be merciful to me. Others say, be gracious to me. Lord, please may the things that they are saying about me not be true. And Lord, if they are true, then please forgive me, be gracious to me, be merciful towards me, redeem me, so that in future those things will not be true of me. You see, David is saying, in many respects, these people are saying these things against me, and actually those things are untrue. But the only reason they're saying those untrue things about me is because they don't know the true things about me. If they knew that, oh boy, would they then have fuel for fire. And so David prays for the Lord's mercy, grace, and redemption. And then having done that, David then reassures himself and casts himself on the Lord once again. My foot stands on level ground. I will bless the Lord in the assemblies. This is where his worship comes from. Remember when he said, I wash my hands in innocence and go around your altar, Lord, raising my voice in thanksgiving and telling about your wondrous works. That's what he's referring to here. I will bless the Lord in the assemblies. Why? Because he's given me a reason to do it. He's given me the platform to stand on. He's given me the solid ground. In fact, he is the solid ground. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. So what are we to do when the stories are flying around and you get a whisper of them and you hear that something is happening on the grapevine. The grapevine is abuzz, the forest is aflame, and you are the target. What are you going to do? Well, do what David does. Go to God. Don't worry about going to the individuals firstly and foremostly. If you need to, you can do that later on. But firstly and foremostly, go to God. Ask Him to vindicate you. Ask Him to examine you and to show you if maybe what they are saying actually is true about you. And then go to God and pray for your salvation. Pray for His grace in your lives, because we all need it. Cannot stand on the solid ground other than by His grace. Amen. Well, let us stand then and sing together. What a friend.